Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for tonight's conversation, Systems in Balance, Seals and Sharks in the Waters of New England. I'm Jim Chase. I'm the president here at the Seacoast Science Center, and I'll be your host for tonight. Makes me sound a little like a talk show host, late night talk show host, but I don't think Jimmy Fallon's got anything to worry about. We have a great panel tonight, and our objective here is to discuss the intersection between marine mammals, seals in particular, great white sharks or great white sharks, and people. This summer in Maine, there was a really unfortunate tragic fatality where a swimmer was killed by a white shark. And I think that sparked the conversation that we're all looking to get some insight on right now. We'll dive into that a little bit tonight with our panelists. It's a great group that we've assembled, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you a little bit too. The ground rules for tonight. This is truly going to be conversational. That's the way we have set this up. And because we've launched this through social media channels, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, we're really looking to engage you in the conversation as we can. We're hoping that you put your questions and comments in the live chat sections under Facebook and YouTube Live. As we can and as they're appropriate, we'll try and feed them right into the conversation. It gives us some real-time interaction about what we're doing, and we're looking forward to being able to do that. We may, however, capture some of the questions and kind of hold them back until the end, and we'll finish up with a Q&A session at the end. So use the live chat. We encourage it. We'll try and work in as we can, but we'll also parking lot some questions for the very end. Tonight's program is part of the Seacoast Science Center's, we'll call it digital pivot, thanks to COVID. Historically, our institution we'll see 90,000 people a year, 25,000 school kids in our springtime programs. March 14th, the pandemic pretty much closed us down. And what we did at that point was make a profound pivot to digital education and digital programming, much like we're doing tonight. This is the first in a series of what we will call coastal conversations. Through the course of the next few months, we're going to have a series of these webinars, and they will be fairly specific to coastal conservation issues here in New Hampshire, in the region of the Western Gulf of Maine. We're going to try and focus on local science with local applications, and we'll be engaged with our partners from the University of New Hampshire, UNH Sea Grant Cooperative Extension, Shoals Marine Lab, and others from the area. So we're going to try and keep it as tight as we can to some topics and research of really important local interest here in New Hampshire. Another artifact of the digital pivot for us was with those school programs and with the lack of admissions over the summer. We've closed all of our normal community events, and we're working on a virtual benefit for the Seacoast Science Center coming up this Friday the 13th. If you're interested, we'd love you to join us at 7 o'clock. I think it's a great program. We have some wonderful guests and some video vignettes to sort of explain where the Science Center has come from, how we reacted during the stress of the pandemic in response to the needs of our community, and then a little bit of a look ahead for what's ahead for us in 2021. Enough of the advertisement. Let's get on to the program tonight, and we'll talk about our panel and seals and sharks. I want to introduce our panel to you tonight. I have with us tonight is Ainsley Smith. Ainsley works with NOAA in support of the NOAA Marine Fisheries Group. We have Kristen Kibblehouse, I knew I was going to get that wrong, from the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, and then Ashley Stokes, the manager of the Seacoast Science Center Marine Mammal Rescue Program. So let's start with Ainsley, and there we go, we're all cleared out. Great. Ainsley, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great fun. Thanks for taking the time. Hey, I kind of want to give our people a little chance to get to know you. And if you could give us a sense of how you became involved in marine conservation and what brought you to working with NOAA on marine mammals and these sort of issues.
Sure, yeah. Growing up, I always loved the ocean and animals, so marine biologist was always kind of on my radar of things you could be when you grow up. I took a little bit of a roundabout way and had a detour. I actually went to college as a physical therapy major and realized that was not the right fit after a couple of years. So I switched over to become a biology major and eventually went on to get my master's degree in coastal management. And in between my degrees, I had a number of great experiences that reinforced that I was doing the right thing in my mind. So I was a part of 2 different stranding network organizations. I went down to the Southeast and did some work with fishery sampling and sea turtle patrol. I worked at a public aquarium for a couple of years, and all of these fantastic experiences in animal husbandry and marine animal conservation really enforced where I should be. So the opportunity came up with an opening up in Gloucester at the NOAA office, and it was a great way to come back home and be a little closer to everyone. And it's been 6 years now. I've been part of the protected resources team. Part of that was doing compliance with the Endangered Species Act first, and now being the part of the marine mammal and sea turtle stranding and disentanglement programs.
That's great. That's a great kind of lead in, and it's good for me to hear that because we run this marine science education institution here, and a lot of questions that we may get is what do I do? Where do I go? How does this turn into a career? And you're clearly a testament that it can be done, and there are opportunities out there. So that's wonderful to hear. Thanks, Ainsley. We'll get back to you in a little bit. I'd like to move over to Kristen now, if we could. Hi, Kristen. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you, Jim?
Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I've got a question for you. White sharks, really? Okay. What series of life choices and career path puts you in the world of marine conservation with a focus on white sharks?
So very different from Ainsley's background. I did not grow up near the ocean. I am from a small farm town in Pennsylvania. So for me, I was not able to go to the beach often unless we did travel down to the shore to New Jersey and such. But I always just had a love for the oceans and always had that kind of fascination with sharks. And so I was able to go to college to study marine science, and I went down south to be able to study that at Coastal Carolina. And then through that, with my marine science degree, it's where I kind of grew my passion for conservation and outreach specifically towards sharks in general. So once I did graduate, I was able to move up here to Massachusetts, where I was able to intern with the white shark researcher up here, which is Dr. Greg Skomel, and that's kind of where I got my feet wet specifically, not to be punny there, but that's where I got to be able to kind of get my experience in the white shark side of research. And I just fell in love with the local community here and being able to see the dynamic we have here as well. So then I was able to be a part of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, starting my way as just a volunteer and being able to help out at our outreach facility, the Shark Center. And then just kind of working my way up. I ran summer camps, and then I became an educator, and I'm the community engagement manager here for AWSC. So I do help run all school programs and outreach events and summer camps and our ecotourism programs. So that is how I got my way here to shark conservation.
Nothing that a good attitude and being flexible doesn't get you, right? I mean, that's a great track record. And I've got to say that being introduced into that world through Greg Skomel is about as good as it gets. If folks don't know, he is probably the world's foremost authority on white sharks, and certainly the foremost authority in the Northeast. He's been doing it for a long time. I remember him engaged in that when I was in graduate school, and not dating him, but the earth was still soft when I was there. Thanks, Kristen. We'll get back to you in a little bit. Let's move over to Ashley. Ashley,
Hello.
my friend, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Ashley and I have known each other for quite a long time, and some of the folks online tonight may know Ashley from her early days here at the Science Center when she was teaching school programs in the intertidal, or even her stint doing weddings and events for us. Ashley has also had a really flexible, varied background. But today, you're the manager of the Seacoast Science Center Marine Mammal Rescue Program. Can you speak a little bit to the path to that? It certainly wasn't weddings.
Sure. So I grew up in Massachusetts. I actually grew up in Lowell, so not too far from the water. But my family and I would spend a week every summer at Seabrook Beach, or in that general area. So my love for the ocean kind of has always been in me, but it grew through those summers. Just being out there on the water and seeing how even one single spot on the beach can be vastly different every single day you go out there was fascinating to me. And one summer, I'd say I was about 12 or 13. We were out there. We went for a walk in the evening, and there was a little harbor seal on the beach. So we, we're looking at it, and we called the aquarium and, did all of those things. But it made me so curious about those animals. So, of course, I had these visions of being a dolphin trainer someday. But you can imagine those jobs are very few and far between, and a lot of them require you to move pretty far away. So I wasn't really ready to do that yet, but I followed my dream for the ocean and my passion for the ocean and went to University of Rhode Island, where I pursued my degree in marine biology with a minor in chemistry. I've always loved the sciences. And when I graduated in May of 2005, I quickly found the Science Center and got a job June of 2005. So I was extremely fortunate to land a job pretty quickly. And I was teaching a lot of the field trip programs to the school kids that come, or the outreach programs, going to different libraries or different schools or birthday parties. And then that fall, I actually kind of diverted a little bit and took the wedding position while simultaneously teaching programs as well. But in addition to all of that, I was also a volunteer for New England Aquarium's marine animal rescue program. So I was responding to a lot of the animals, specifically up in the New Hampshire, Northern Mass region. So when New England Aquarium decided to step back from some of their territory in 2013, we were given the opportunity to potentially start our own marine mammal rescue program. So that was a nice kind of natural transition for me. I was able to, with the help of you, Jim, we were able to write the proposal and get the application in to start our own program. So it was a big undertaking. It was one of the first programs we've done that the person we're doing the program for doesn't pay for it. So you can imagine the campers pay to come to camp, and the school kids, their school pays to come. But marine mammals are different in that they're not paying for their response. So that was a big undertaking for us, but it was something that we were really passionate about. So I was very excited to slide into that position. And just last month, I celebrated 15 years at the Science Center. So wow. I kind of grew up at the Science Center, and it's exciting to see, where the program can go.
Well, that's great. And, since the inception of the Marine Mammal Rescue Program here in 2014, I think we've responded to, not we, I didn't do it. I think you may have responded to nearly 1,000 animals, perhaps over 1,000 incidents. Can you describe the work a little bit to our viewers here tonight so they get a sense of, I want to make sure that we weave marine mammals into sharks and then the people connection. And I think that we can start with your side here and talk about marine mammals a little bit.
That marine mammals
Uh-oh. We have lost Ashley. We have found Ashley.
I don't know. I'm hearing some people are hearing that too. You can imagine the Marine Mammal Protection Act that was passed in 1972 protected marine mammals. So not only
I'm looking for some insight from Brian behind the scenes here.
There we go.
We may have to move on. Oh, we're good? Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Perfect. He's given me the thumbs up. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act was something that was passed in 1972. So hopefully all of our viewers out there know a little bit about it. But basically it protects all marine mammals. So that's not only seals, but it also protects dolphins, it protects whales, it protects porpoises. And that basically means that people can't take those animals, so they certainly can't be hunted anymore. There used to be a bounty. But that is a thing of the past now. Seals, unfortunately, were nearly extirpated from this area, meaning that they weren't seen. So that's certainly, as these populations are rebounding, that's something completely new for everybody that's living today. So even the older generations, they're not accustomed to living with these animals, but they were around before that. And actually, a lot of archaeological data, when looking at genetics, suggests that these populations were even bigger than they are now. The genetic diversity was a lot wider. So we're certainly learning a lot about them, and that's where these programs come into play. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, our program started in 2014, and we started with just New Hampshire. So when New England Aquarium forfeited some of their territory, there was also northern Massachusetts that they also forfeited. But we wanted to ensure that we could start with our home state of New Hampshire and do a great job running the program. We didn't want to just do a mediocre job starting a brand new thing. We wanted to hit all of the nails on the head that we were interested. And, that's not only the data collection and responding to the animals, but talking to the public about them as well. And why were they seeing them there? And what are they seeing on the beach? And then once we had a few years under our belts, so to speak, we decided in the end of 2017, when we had to reapply for our stranding agreement, to expand our territory. So we decided to expand into northern Massachusetts. So we now respond from the Maine border south to Essex, Massachusetts. So for those familiar with the area, just south of the Crane Beach area. So you can imagine, every case is a little bit different. So you're seeing some live seals on an area in Salisbury, Mass. So that's one of our known hollow areas. So certainly seals encompass a lot of what we respond to. I'd wager to say about 92 to 95% of our caseload every year. But that's not to say we don't see other things as well. We do respond and are responsible for whales, dolphins, and porpoise as well. So for some of you listening, you may have remembered snowplow, the large humpback whale that we responded to in 2016. So we just never know what's going to happen when the hotline rings. We had a case earlier today as well that we dealt with. So, it always seems to happen that you just never know when things are going to pop up. And sometimes it's when you're preparing for something else, like this webinar. So in the case of deceased animals, like you're seeing on there, there's a host of different data measurements that we have to take, from as simple as, what is the animal? Is it a seal? Is it a dolphin? Is it live or dead? Where is it? Is there anything out of the ordinary that we're looking at as we look at an animal from head to toe? Does it have any wounds or injuries? And what do those wounds or injuries need? And what are they indicative of? Is it something like shark predation? Is it something anthropogenic or human caused? So we look at a lot of different things when we're responding to these animals. And we simply couldn't do it without our volunteer mass. So we have about 40 volunteers right now that help us respond to these animals. And we respond to about an average of 100 to 110 cases a year. With that being said, every year is a little bit different. In 2018, we closed out the year with 298, so more than double our normal year. This year, we're standing at, the case this morning marked 82, so we're right on par with what a normal year should be. But with that being said, we've responded to just over 1,000 animals, different unique animals, since our program started. So those are a number of different species. Of course, seals are the most popular. This is a harbor seal, the most common of all of our species. So this is one of our year-round residents. This is a hooded seal. This is one of the most rare species that we see, but we have had a couple the last couple of years. They typically are only around in the winter months, so they're visitors that come down from the Arctic. Similar to this animal, this is a harp seal. Generally, we'll see these animals as juveniles when they're creamy colored with these big brown spots. This little guy doesn't have too many spots, but some of them have a lot. And then we have our last species, which is another year-round resident, the gray seal. So for our two year-round animals, they look pretty similar. They're both kind of a gray mottled pattern. But the big difference to note is gray seals that are really common on the Cape, not quite as common for us up here, but they will top out the males about 800 pounds, so between 700 and 800 pounds, whereas our harbor seals, the other year-round resident, typically will top out at about 250 to 300 pounds. So those are all things, the species, what's going on with it, is it live or dead? Those are all things we look for in these cases. And a lot of people, the misconception is, oh, I came across this dead animal on the beach. Do I need to do anything with it? Does it mean anything? And we want to hear about all of them. We don't just want to hear about the live animals on the beach, but we want to hear about the dead ones too. That's where a lot of the research comes into play and what happened to that animal, and do we need to look further into it? Is there something alarming going on? So it's an exciting field to be in, but you'll hear a little bit about our public outreach as well, which is a huge component of marine conservation, not only with marine mammals, but with all animals, as we try to keep, the blue planet healthy.
Well, that's great. Thank you. That's a great synopsis of the program. You made mention of outreach, and what I'd like to do is, from the man behind the curtain tonight is Brian, who's our newest addition to that program, and I'd like to welcome Brian. He's making all the technology happen. Welcome to the Marine Mammal Rescue Team, and can you give us a quick synopsis of your new role? Because I want to get back to Ashley, and I want her to talk about some of our data and some of the shark data that we've amassed over the past couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jim. So my name's Brian. I'm the Community Outreach Manager here at the Seacoast Science Center. And in short, I'll keep it very short because I want to hear from Ainsley and Kristen what they have in store for us tonight. But my goal is to educate and speak with as many people as I can in New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts in our response territory to get them aware of our hotline, because it's something that we've seen during this pandemic is that when people aren't aware of what we do, or if they're not visiting the beach, we cannot be successful in our rescue and response efforts. So during the pandemic, a lot of the beaches closed, and we had a sharp drop in the responsiveness. We weren't able to do our job as well. And so all of you listeners out there tonight, you play a crucial role in our ability to respond to any species of marine mammal that comes up on our beach. You are our eyes on the ocean. So my goal is just to facilitate that.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brian. And it's a really critical role that the public has to get that information to us, because I want to bring Ashley back, and I want her to talk briefly about the science behind this and the data collection that we're involved in, because, we have recent episodes of documenting, a variety of reasons for fatalities here, including pathology, viral pathology, and including shark predation. That's all part of the game. So I'd love you to speak to that a little bit, if you could, Ashley.
Sure. So I mentioned a little bit about the data collection that we take into account when we're out there. So that's, a lot of different measurements of the animal, the overall length, how big are its flippers, how many teeth does it have any wounds? But another thing that we're constantly looking at is disease surveillance. So I mentioned our case number being really large in 2018. And that was not only in our territory, but also throughout our network. So our Greater Atlantic Network runs from Maine through Virginia with different colleagues, and we respond to all live and dead marine mammals. But in 2018, we saw a significant uptick in deaths of not only harbor seals, but gray seals as well. And the common thing that was found throughout that unusual mortality event and the investigation led by NOAA into that event was phocine distemper virus. So similar to canine distemper virus that your dog can get. It was a virus that ran through these animals, and it does occur naturally in the wild, but occasionally it does take over as well. So we like to look into those and try to identify them as quickly as possible when we have an issue in the wild, which is why, animals that are freshly deceased as well, we look at those as being very scientifically valuable. So if an animal is freshly dead on the beach, we do whatever we can to get that animal off the beach and into a lab setting so that we can do a post-mortem exam or a necropsy on that animal. Very similar to a human autopsy, you look the animal over externally and internally and take a host of different samples to look at it. But sometimes what happened or what was going on was visible externally. So, in the case of a shark interaction, you can look at the animal, we can take bite radius measurements, we can take photos, and that's where these partnerships come into play. Certainly with Atlantic White Shark Conservancy and experts down there, something, I don't know the bite radius of different white sharks or mako sharks or blue sharks, but simply by looking at a photo and hearing about the measurements and the depth of the different wounds, they can determine whether it was a shark interaction, and more specifically, was it a white shark or was it something different? It can't always be determined. It kind of depends on the animal. Is it freshly dead? Is some of it decomposition as well that's making the wound margins larger? But we like to determine what happened when we can. So for those animals, you think about, we've responded to over 1,000 animals, but we've only had 9 suspect or confirmed shark predation events on these animals. We did have 2 this summer. So we looked really closely at those and got photos and measurements to our colleagues right away. So we were able to determine that those were shark predation events, but more specifically white shark. So you may have heard about the new receivers that have been put in New Hampshire. So hopefully that will give us more of a window into these animals and how often they're passing by. I'm sure Kristen will talk about, people think that white sharks being in the area is a new thing, but they've been around for a long time. There's just more of an eye on them now. So we're constantly learning more and more every day about these marine mammals, more specifically seals, but also the sharks as well. And those interactions, and seals are sentinel species. They're indicators of ocean health and how the blue planet is doing. So we're trying to learn more about them. The diet studies is a big thing that's going on now as these interactions with fishermen are ongoing. But it was very surprising as these diet studies were ongoing that gray seals, when they're inshore, 53% of their diet is sand lance. Whereas we were thinking that it's bass and cod, and even offshore, 48% of their diet is the 3 species of hake. And hake, when they're young, will feed on larval cod. So these are all things that we're learning and seeing more about. And do seals depredate on fishing lines and on nets? Of course they do. They're opportunistic animals, but we're trying to look at ways to deter that and figure out how bad the problem is and how to coexist with this conservation success.
Ashley, I'm going to bring you back on later on when we talk a little bit about the fishing interactions, because I think that's an important thing that you just started to touch on there. At this point, I'd like to reintroduce Ainsley Smith, working with NOAA Fisheries. Ainsley, can you tell us a little more about sort of the natural history of some of these animals, particularly the seals, and why they need a helping hand from us? I think Ashley touched on kind of what we do, but why is it important? Why is it important that NOAA is involved in marine mammal conservation? And then I'd like you to also speak to NOAA's role in white shark management. I kind of rolled 3 things up in there for you, but we can tease them out as we go.
Sure. So as Ashley was just starting to touch on at the end, marine mammals are very vulnerable to human impacts since we are living and working on the water in coastal communities in New England. So especially we have a lot of interactions with seals. And some of the cases that our stranding network respond to are cases where seals have been encountered too closely by humans. Oftentimes people have great intentions of helping an animal But in the case of some seals, it does more harm than good. And so luckily, we've got great partners in our stranding network, like Seacoast, who can have trained responders or volunteers come out and assess the situation and determine when an animal needs more care or when it is just exhibiting its normal behaviors. But it's really important to remember that while we're all living here together, we need to be sharing the shore with these seals. Like any young animals, our harbor seal pups need to rest on the beach. They need to nurse and bond with their mom in the spring. And a lot of times, mom seal will leave her pup on the beach. Well, it's not a good swimmer yet, and she will go off and swim and catch her fish. And she's still watching from the water. And so it's important to remember that if she looks back and people are crowding around the seal, or if people have picked it up and moved the pup, she might have to abandon it. She might be scared to come back. She may not find it if it's relocated to another beach. And at that point, sometimes our stranding network has to step in and bring it to a rescue facility and teach it how to be a seal and how to eat on its own before it can be released and be independent in the wild.
It's really critical that people leave them alone on the beach and notify. I recall an incident here where years and years ago we were called to a location before we were an authorized response entity, and someone had taken a pup off the beach, had it in their kitchen, and was trying to feed it tuna fish and water from a dog bowl. The poor animal was probably doomed at that point. But people are just trying to do the best thing they can, and they don't know. And folks like you and folks like our team help with that. What's NOAA's role in marine mammal conservation, and how does that intersect with their management of white sharks? Because as the seal population grows and the white shark population responds accordingly, we have these instances of overlap and interaction, and really what is a naturally occurring ecological process.
Sure. So NOAA's role is to oversee the stewardship of all of our living marine resources and their habitats. So that is seals and sharks and fish and corals and other ocean species that we have. And so it's our role to implement laws like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and to make sure that people are abiding by these rules to ensure the species have a chance to recover and thrive at a healthy population level. And so with the implementation of these laws, we are seeing recovery in both seal populations and shark populations in New England, which is very exciting for us. It shows that these rules work, and that when we put fishery management plans in place or marine mammal conservation plans in place, that these work and we are reaching people. And so it's very exciting, but at the same time, we do need to learn how to coexist together as these populations are changing.
It's wonderful to see instances where plans are put in place and there's a visible or obvious ecological improvement. You know, it's more sharks, more seals. It's pretty tangible. And they're macro animals too. You know, it's charismatic, it's big fauna, and people react to that. And I think that it can be very emotional. It can be very emotional in potential conflict, but it also draws attention to the fact that these animals are inhabiting a larger piece of our shared environment. Can we talk a little bit about the NOAA partnership with partners like the Science Center and how that works? Maybe Ashley can come back on here and speak to that. We have a couple of minutes before we move on to the next section, but the partnership between NOAA and the Seacoast Science Center and how that works.
Sure. So the Science Center, as I mentioned, is just one of many organizations in the Greater Atlantic Network, again, that spans from Maine through Virginia, that NOAA oversees. So basically, we are conducting a lot of this work, but under the umbrella of NOAA Fisheries. So we have stranding agreements or permits to be able to carry out this work and collect data on these animals and respond to these animals and get those that need care to the care that they need, or, in some cases, humane euthanasia is the best thing that's in the best interests of these animals from an animal welfare perspective. But, we at the Science Center tend to interact a lot with NOAA because we're close by. NOAA's, headquarters for this area is in Gloucester. So that's one of the areas, though it is southern to where our territory stops. It's another area that remains as a gap in coverage when New England Aquarium forfeited some of their territory to focus more on sea turtle response. So we are in the fortunate position that our volunteers are very eager. They love helping. We were able to step in some instances to animals that need response outside of our territory. But we don't do that without the approval of NOAA or, NOAA reaching out to us. For example, we had an animal today down in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that we were able to step up and assist with. So the partnerships come in handy, similar to, our partners in Maine, throughout COVID, when we had all of these limitations that we couldn't pass state lines, we were still able to get harbor seal pups that needed care from Maine to rehabilitation facilities in Massachusetts.
So if someone saw our marine mammal rescue truck parked at the New Hampshire State Liquor Store at the traffic circle, we were transferring Well, I want everybody to know that we were transferring a seal from Maine to rehab down in Massachusetts. We weren't necessarily stocking up for some sort of an event or another. That's an important distinction.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing to see, how, despite some of our organizations being a little further from one another, College of the Atlantic is pretty far up in northern Maine. But we're very close with them in that we can step up and assist with getting these animals to the care that they need, or stepping into a gap in coverage to get an animal the care that it needs. So again, you just never know what a day is going to bring in this field.
and I think it's important to think about the idea that in terms of rehabilitation facilities for these animals, that resources become incredibly limited. There are not that many opportunities, and frankly, to tease a little of the future of the Science Center, that's something that we may look at in the future to bring here to New Hampshire, to have a facility where we can do some more of that work on site, so that as Brian just brought up, we'll have the ability to rehab some of these animals more locally and release them back to the very beach they came off.
Right.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you both. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Ainsley.
Thank you.
Let me see if we can reintroduce Kristen Kibblehouse from Atlantic White Shark. Hey, Kristen, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Hey, I'd love you to fill us in a little bit on a couple of things, but particularly I want to talk about the predator-prey relationships with these white sharks and some of that ecological dynamic that we're seeing right now. It might be helpful to quite briefly sort of frame the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy so we understand kind of a little about what that organization is and what your scope is. And then we'll go on to the ecology and the predator-prey, because I think that's really super interesting stuff. Not that the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy in and of itself is not. I don't mean to say that. It's just that ecology is cool.
Yeah, so for us, AWSC, Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, we are a nonprofit. We're based in Chatham, Massachusetts, so on the elbow of Cape Cod, where we are, again, a nonprofit that's helping to fund the great white shark research that's going on here off of our coastline. That research is being conducted by Dr. Greg Scommel. I mentioned him earlier. He's the head biologist for Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. So we're helping his research, and we're also then helping to conduct that research with our own staff scientist, Megan Winton. With that data that Dr. Scommel and Megan are collecting throughout every year of research, then we can then help aid in public safety protocols here along our coastline. So we are a nonprofit, but with that, we do not have any jurisdiction of what happens along the coastline with public safety protocol, but we can at least share that data with the towns for the people that can make those decisions themselves. And then we also have our education side, which is my job, and our whole education department here as well. So, and I do see a question pop up on the screen. It says they're white sharks instead of great white sharks. Same exact fish. So a great white and a white shark, same exact thing. We just kind of drop the great and just say white shark. great white is kind of the name that media with movies like Jaws and TV shows kind of added on that great part of it. I mean, they are a pretty awesome shark. They are pretty great, but it is technically the white shark.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I love it that we can work some of the questions in as they come up. Can you talk to us a little bit about the natural history of these sharks, of the white sharks? You know, I understand they grow with different life strategies, different forage strategies at different times in their lives, and I think that would give the folks some insight into how that relates to the population dynamics of fish and seals and some of the other things that are helping to bring them into conflict with people.
Yeah, of course. So for a white shark, very similar to how us, once we are born, you know, we're not born with our teeth. So we do have to eat kind of mushy foods and then upgrade up to those more harder foods that we can chew. So great white sharks are born with their teeth, but their teeth shape evolves as they grow. So when a white shark is born, they're around 4 to 5 feet in length. And with that, then their teeth do have that triangle shape, but it is a flatter triangle and it's more sharp. And so that tooth is specifically more equipped to capture things like squid and fish. So then as they grow older out of that kind of pup phase and they get into their juvenile and teenage years and into their adult years, just like the shark you saw on the screen was around a 16-foot shark, so a full grown. With that, then their teeth evolve, and then they get that classic triangle tooth with the serrations down the edge that kind of act like steak knives, and that's when they do kind of graduate to our marine mammals like seals and dead whales. So then as the larger the shark grows, then the larger animal they eat to help sustain them and have their energy throughout the day.
So when does the shark transition from a juvenile, let's say, to an adult? How large is that, or how old is that?
They say it's around 10 to 12 feet. And then with that, then that's anywhere between 10 to, I would say, like 15 years is when they kind of go from that juvenile to like the teenage year phase. We have seen then those smaller sharks, when I say smaller, those 10 to 12 feet sharks, they do then try to start those predations on seals. And I ran an ecotourism trip last month and we saw a missed predation on a shark try to go in for a seal, very similar to the video now that's up on the screen. You know, great white sharks are these apex predators, but seals can outmaneuver sharks. You know, they are much smaller and they can swim a little faster than white sharks can. So, you know, as they are growing, they're learning how to prey on those seals. So we do get these missed predation attempts as well. So even though they are that apex predator, seals can outsmart the shark.
Well, that's good to know. It's nice that there's a little balance out there in the world as both populations are increasing. We hear about white sharks as a conservation success story. And can you frame that a little bit from the perspective of the White Shark Conservancy? I think Ainsley mentioned a little bit of sort of NOAA's perspective on it, but from your perspective, what are you seeing that makes you want to say this has been a success story? Yeah,
so I know Ashley and Ainsley both touched on the coming back of seals into our oceans, and sharks have a very similar story. So just like seals, sharks have always been here around in our coastline. And with that, they have been dated as far back as 1865 from Henry David Thoreau's book, Cape Cod. So they have been here for a very long time. And just like seals, how they were taken out during the seal culling, great white sharks were popular for sport fishing. And with movies like Jaws and that fear of sharks really amped up the popularity of fishing the species here out of our oceans. And specifically here in the Atlantic, it is estimated that about 80% of the population of white sharks were fished out. So we did see a rapid decrease of our populations here in the Northwest Atlantic. So in 1997, the white shark was put under a federal protection, so meaning you cannot go out and purposely fish and kill that species anymore, which that is what Ainsley was touching on with how NOAA is involved in white shark conservation. And then as well as they were put under a state protection here in Massachusetts in 2005. So now with those protections put into place, we are starting to see these species, very similarly to the gray seal and other seal species here, their populations grow back. So for a white shark, they do not reach a maturity level. So when they can have that reproduction age of around 20 years. So for that, so they have to be 20 years old to be able to reproduce. So those sharks that could have been alive in those protections in 1997 and in 2005 are just starting to be able to reproduce now. So this is why it is really awesome to see that conservation success, because now we are seeing them frequently come back to our coastline year after year, and we have been able to study them and tag them and track them.
Well, that reproductive lag really puts focus on, sometimes we have to be patient when we set these policies and plans in place, because the biology that responds to the planning can be quite at a period that we're not used to. It looks like we have another question here. Do you see that one?
I do. So which month is white shark population greatest off of Cape Cod? So based off of tagging and tracking efforts here, so we look at as those acoustic receivers that are placed off of our coastline, and they're out here kind of the New England area. So here off of the Cape, based on that receiver activity, it's actually October. So we do get that. It's peak month for white shark activity. So I can't say that's when the population is the greatest, but that is when it is greatest activity here off of our coastline is in October.
Well, Kristen, I think that the fishing industry, let's say, may not see white sharks as a conservation success story. I think that's one of several places where the intersection between people, marine mammals, and sharks come into some conflict. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because we really need to reconcile some long-held beliefs with the most current science and what we're seeing in the field. Can you speak to that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah, of course. And again, very similar to, white shark story, how, I forget if Ashley or Ainsley was mentioning it, how we're talking about seals and their diets, how there is a misconception of how their diet is, and with that research that they're finding that it's the complete opposite of what we were thinking. And I think that starts within those kinds of communities as well, but I think that happens anywhere. And, we all have our own beliefs of where we came from. So really can't blame anyone for believing things that we've always learned from growing up. But I definitely think that, though, that's why we have these kinds of talks between ourselves here, so more people can learn about those populations and the science behind everything. And then we also do collaborate with local fishermen here on the Cape through the Cape Cod Fishermen's Alliance. And so they are the local fishermen group here in Chatham that do support our small boat fishery here. And we are able to collaborate with them on outreach events as well. So then they can share what they are seeing out on the water. We can share the data that we are seeing as well. And that's how then we can collaborate with our local community.
That's great. If I can I bring Ashley back for a minute? Because I'd like her to go back to something she was saying about seal nutrition and some of what we've learned about what they eat. I'd like to reinforce that, because that's sort of the root of some of this misunderstanding. There's some good science around this nowadays.
Sure. So a lot of this, the new diet studies and, all of that, it doesn't all stem from, but there was a group that has been formed, the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. It's a mouthful, I know, but they're looking at a lot of these issues. And it's not only scientists and biologists and researchers that are part of this group, but commercial fishermen as well. So it's that perfect segue into looking into these different issues, how we can coexist, how much of an impact are marine mammals, seals in particular, having on the fishery. But that also, in addition to the diet and looking at different diet studies, whether it's just through looking at what's in the stomach of a seal when it's caught, in bycatch, or if it's deceased on the beach, but also looking at, DNA analysis and genetics analysis and, I'm getting into the weeds here, but really looking into the finer points of diets and how they fit into the bigger, ecosystem and into the bigger food web. Bycatch also of these marine animals has a pretty heavy impact that we don't always see from shore, if you will. It's estimated that about between 11 and 1,200 seals are bycaught each year. So that, gets close to these numbers that we were bounty hunting before. So we have to look at that and how that plays a role as well. But those animals are hugely valuable to the necropsy process and looking more into these animals. It was very interesting to me through North Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. When we had one of the meetings, we were able to do a necropsy, or an abbreviated necropsy, on a gray seal that was bycaught by fishery. And there was, he's come to be very close, in this, looking at seals and how they fit, and should we get rid of them all or should we not? And he is very level-headed. He was in this necropsy, and we allowed him to open the stomach of this seal, and we said, what do you expect to see when we get into this animal? And he was like, I have no doubt that there's going to be a belly full of cod, knowing that this animal was bycaught, but it was primarily hake that was in there. So that was very interesting. So it's important to hear the fishermen and understand, their frustration. This is their livelihood that we're talking about. Yeah. So it's extremely important, especially this day and age, as we look at the rebounding populations, how we can coexist, what's the best way to coexist, and how can we learn to live with this conservation success story and respect these animals instead of, thinking that we need to go back to the days of, culling and extirpation.
I love that we kind of finished the main stem of the program on that, because I think that question of balance is so key, and it kind of brings us back to the title. And there are some things in this ecological web here of these three animals, people, seals, and white sharks, that when it comes to what they eat and how they interact with each other, we're still coming to understand. And historically, there's a lot of misinformation surrounding this, which is sort of what we need to combat and fight at this point. At this point, this won't throw Brian too big of a wrench, but I'm going to change the order of the last two little bits. And I think I'd like to move to Q&A if we can. And then we'll close after that. So I know that they've been working hard in the back to pull some things together. Here we go. Mentioned seals were a sentinel species. What data are we collecting? What data are we collecting to show how the seals regionally are doing? Are the warmer Gulf of Maine water temps impacting them? Great question. Insight into the population dynamics. Are you seeing a relationship with the warming Gulf of Maine? I don't know. Sure. Who wants to jump in on that?
Ainsley, I think you and I can probably touch on this. Sure. So I mentioned that seals are sentinel species, in that they're kind of, people have also referred to them as the canary in the coal mine type of situation. So they can help kind of give us a window into the ocean ecosystem. They're swimming in a lot of the same water that we are. They're eating some of the same seafoods that we are. Some of the diseases, especially those that are zoonotic or can be passed from us to them and vice versa, play a big role as well. So those are all important things to look for and look more into as we're doing and carrying out this work. I think it's hard to say. It's kind of early on to say exactly what kind of an impact the warming Gulf of Maine is having on these species and climate change. But certainly we've started seeing some species that I would have said we wouldn't see here. We had a bottlenose dolphin in the Merrimack River for 2 months last summer. We've seen more hooded seals lately. We're starting to see slightly more gray seals than we've seen in the past. So certainly there is some shifting going on. I just don't think we can really speak to the severity of it or the long-term impacts that it could have. But Ainsley, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that all sounds great. I was going to say one example that we tend to see in the winter is our ice seals, our harp seals, and our hooded seals, which are normally Arctic or subarctic species coming down from Canada. And these are species that are used to living on snow and eating snow to hydrate themselves in addition to eating fish. And sometimes one of the problems that we see with our stranding network is they have to respond to ice seals who are on a beach with no snow and ice, and these animals end up eating sand and rocks, thinking that they're eating snow and helping themselves. And we're seeing a lot of those problems every winter now with these animals not having as much snow. So that's one example that we're paying close attention to how those animals are responding and doing in rehab.
Kristen, I know that around the really tragic fatality in mid-coast Maine, there was some immediate conversation about the warming waters of the Gulf of Maine impacting the range of the white sharks. I think you mentioned it earlier that they'd always been here, but has there been any further correlation there that you folks have worked on?
So for the white sharks that we see up in Maine, we are tracking these white sharks all up and down the east coast of here, the United States, where we've seen them as far north as the Newfoundland area, up in Canada, as far south as Florida as well. And as I did state earlier, these sharks have always been here, and just as they're becoming more and more apparent, more and more people are knowing about them, then more and more people are on their boats looking for them when they're out enjoying our waters here. And with that, we have been able to collaborate with University of New England with the researchers up there. And then there are, with the fatality, there have been purchasing receivers to be placed up there as well to be able to track those sharks more effectively up in the area.
We have another question here about somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, I think it might have been Ashley, mentioned that there are acoustic receivers, or maybe it was Kristen, to track the sharks here along the New Hampshire coast. Where are those receivers? How do they work? How's that process go?
Yeah, so how those receivers work, I wish I had an acoustic receiver near me. I'll show my water bottle. It is a black cylinder, very similar to what my water bottle looks like. And then it is attached to a buoy itself. And then a shark, kind of stuffed shark here too as well, will have an acoustic tag hanging off the back of it. And then it will then talk to what an acoustic receiver would be in the water. So the receiver itself has about a 300-meter radius around it. So anytime a shark with an acoustic tag would swim by an acoustic receiver, it is going to pick it up and it's going to give us the date, the time, and the tag number itself. So it's very similar to Easy Pass. So then how it tracks our cars going through the tolls, our shark with our acoustic tag is going to swim by that receiver. And then we can then look at where that shark has been swimming. And it will then record every single time that shark does swim by.
But that's only the tagged sharks, and that's only the sharks that were perhaps, they're tagged by some sort of a harpoon or a dart, I think, typically a dart, to put that in place. So what you're seeing is a tiny fraction of or a small fraction, I don't know if it's tiny, a smaller fraction of what the total population is. So.
Yes, right now there's a little over 250 white sharks that are tagged.
Great piece of data. What are your thoughts on shark diving and human interaction that occurs? How can we raise awareness without stepping too far into their world? What a great question.
Yeah, so I think I've cage dived with white sharks. I've dove with hammerheads. I've dove with tiger sharks before. And I'm all for shark diving as long as we're respecting that animal from a respectful distance, and as well as not harassing that animal itself. And so for here off of Cape Cod, cage diving is prohibited right now just because we do see these sharks so close to shore, and one, it really wouldn't be viable to throw a cage in the water with how close to shore that they do get. But also then we want to make sure that we're not interfering with those natural movements of these sharks here, since they are so close to shore. So there are groups here, along with ourselves, that run ecotourism programs that you can go out on a boat and you are able to look at those sharks, and those are either done by a spotter pilot is flying to find that shark, or the captain is just looking into the water and trying to find a white shark swimming by or near. So there's no baiting or chumming involved to be able to find that specific fish.
Wow, excellent. Curious about the increase in gray seal numbers. They seem to become much more common than harbor seals, at least on Cape Cod. Is that increase entirely due to the Marine Mammal Protection Act? And if so, the act seems to be impacting harbor seals and gray seals differently. Ainsley, is NOAA collecting any data on that? Is that a
Yeah.
NOAA question?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Both of these species are protected equally under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but it has been interesting to see that gray seals have been recovering at a faster pace and expanding their territory throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic a bit faster than the harbor seals are. And we don't really know much about that right now. It may just be, differences in the personalities of the species, that gray seals may be bigger and more aggressive and have the ability to kind of force harbor seals out. Whereas sometimes when we see harbor seals, they may be more easily stressed or, much smaller than the gray seals. So it's definitely an interesting observation. And we rely on the stranding network to provide sightings and stranding information to us so we can see that they are increasing not only just on the Cape, but we are seeing haulouts in New York. We are seeing seals in Virginia now. And so that's such an important partnership as we track the recovery of those species.
Wow, cool. Do we have any other questions back there? Are sharks social creatures? Wow.
That is a great question. Depends on our species of shark. So we typically see that white sharks are kind of that lone shark. We will see multiple individuals in one area, usually where there is a seal haul out and such, of where we'll see that. But white sharks typically solo, but other species like lemon sharks or black tips, they do move in groups. So,
wow, that's pretty cool. It looks like we have another one here. A question about National Marine Park and the current status. I imagine that's the Stellwagen question here in the Gulf of Maine.
I actually don't have an update on that. Our national marine sanctuaries are managed separately than our fish and seal species. But I would be happy we can pull up a link and I can share that with you afterwards, maybe.
Well, and I do know that the Northeast Canyon and Seamounts designation as a national marine sanctuary or national monument in a marine sanctuary sort of setting has been challenged by the present administration. So some of the protections are certainly in flux. There's no question about that.
So does shark activity at the New Hampshire receivers accounted for? So in the ideal world, yes. So hopefully once that receiver is hauled out, that is dependent on the town. So in years past, there used to be receivers up for Isle of Shoals, and this season there were a few deployed, I want to say at Hampton Beach. I think I'm remembering that name right. But with that, then once the town does pull that up out of the water, then they would share that information with Dr. Greg Spolmolin as well as Megan Winton, so we could input that information on that app. So it does take time, but that does get pulled out of the water. That information is downloaded and such. But yes, we'll hope that can be put on that.
I think we have time for one more. We have a question here because we're running a touch after 8 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of people's time, both for our panelists and our viewers. Safety of surfers, swimmers, scuba diving. How's that all impacted? Are there some rules to the road to navigate safely among the sharks?
Yes. So I do want to start off with saying that, yes, we are seeing these white sharks here off of our coastline, but it is still incredibly rare for a shark attack to happen. So do want to start off with that. Yes, it's still incredibly rare for that white shark attack to happen. And with that, there are some public safety precautions and kind of shark smart beach tips that local beaches and lifeguards here on the Cape have been putting out for people to be more aware of the species here along our coastline. So if that is paying attention to flags, so if you do frequent our beaches here on Cape Cod, there are purple shark flags that fly at beaches for that reminder, a constant reminder that sharks can be there. Increased signage. If you do like to surf or dive, we always know the rule for diving, always have your dive buddy with you. But with that then as well as for surfing as well, or offshore swimming or paddleboarding, it is suggested to be doing that in groups or with a pair, or at least have someone on shore, kind of having that extra set of eyes there for you. then as well as that if there is a seal near or a seal in the water, that is potential prey for that shark there as well. So want to make sure that we're just not respecting sharks, we are respecting those seals from a distance as well when being in our ocean, so we can coexist.
Great. That's awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap for us tonight. I want to thank our panelists, Ashley and Kristen and Ainsley. It's been great. I hope our viewers have appreciated the conversation. I know I certainly have, and I've learned a bunch. So with that, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune in tonight. And I want to ask you to stay shark smart, stay safe, be healthy, and we'll see you again next time. Keep an eye out for more of these coastal conversations from the Seacoast Science Center. Good night, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.